Since the beginning of the church, since the tabernacle, since Jerusalem and onward, we've always used art in our displays. So I think it's appropriate that A Righteous Temple would use art as well. I mean, we already worship through music, our pastors, service, fellowship, so why not add art to add another dimension to our worship?
To get a wider variety of views, we asked the members of the church what they thought about art and why it is important in the church. Now, why do you think art is important in the church?
I think art is important in the church because it allows people to show the talent that God has blessed people with by displaying the art in church.
And why do you think we should include art in a righteous temple?
I think that art is a way that you can express yourself, and it's a form of worship.
Now, Leslie, why do you think art is important in the church?
I think art is super important in general, but I think specifically in the church, it creates more of a beautiful environment. And I think like when someone walks into a church, like you want something that kind of brings everything together and brings just the holy place together. And I think having that those kind of like pictures and stuff kind of help. And I also think it shows people's talents and abilities that God has given them. And I just think that it is super important, and it pulls the scenery of the church together, and you can see God's beauty through that.
And why do you think art is important in the church?
I think it's important because it shows the religion's rich history.
And why do you think it's important that we include art in our church?
I believe art is a good visual representation of the story of Christ. It's a good way to depict the various events within the Bible.
And why do you think we should have art in the church?
Art is just another representation of how we as humans get to create things, and God is the ultimate creator, so it's really cool to be able to have things like art because in a way it can be a way that we worship people, or not people, but God, by using depictions of people, depictions of nature, doing things like that. So it's cool because it's another way to relate to God and relate to like His creative nature and the things about that, and I think if people are good at it, why not let them do it? So there's that.
After talking with a lot of different members of the church and hearing your different opinions about why we should have art in the church, we thought we'd tell you a little bit about why we as the board decided that we would expand the budget to fit more visual arts.
So as we interviewed people of our congregation, one thing that really stood out to us was the verse, how we could tie it back to the verse, 1 Corinthians 10:31, and that says, whatever you do, do it to the glory of God. So many people talked about how art is it's a form of worship, and so that's why we wanted to expand the budget to include some art so that people in our congregation could worship in a new way.
Art in the church doesn't have to be a biblical representation, but it can just be something beautiful, such as stained glass or a landscape.
A lot of you as members of the church may be confused about how artists and Christians can collaborate in this way. And one thing we wanted you to be aware of is the fact that in the early 90s there was an artist who said that he felt called to be an artist, but later he was quoted saying that he didn't feel called to be an artist but a Christian. But in how he was called to be a Christian was that he did that through his art. And so we want people of our church to be able to represent their faith through their art, and then we want to use that as decorative and as calling and just as things in our church to show God's love and to just be a different way to represent Christ's love to the congregation.
So while we were going through this, we realized that there are some restrictions that you'd have to place on art for it to be proper to have in the church. So first and foremost, we want it to be Christ-centered, and it should be purposeful. And we really liked the idea of powerful simplicity, whether that is the decorations on our stage or the traditional stained glass windows, that sort of thing. We really want to emphasize beauty in these sort of things, and then we want to be representing the faith, but not to the point of idolization. And then also, it should be a mixture of stable art and changing art so that it maintains interest and inspiration within the church.
Our goal in adding art to A Righteous Temple is to first and foremost connect with God and worship on a more visual level. We already worship through our sermons and through our vocal worship of singing. We worship through dance and different things like that, and also just with fellowshipping with one another. We also worship through service and things outside of the church building itself. We believe that by adding another dimension into worship, we can connect with the Lord and with the other members of our church on a deeper and more spiritual level.